So we've had a fair few previews now talking about the Lion's Law in current 40k. It seems that Mr. L. Johnson has some sort of way of travelling through the jungles of the Warp. He's been active covertly before the events of Book 5 of Arcs of Omen, and he's going to be gathering himself a band of fallen knights. Let's talk about what's brought him to this point and his details so far in contemporary 40k lore. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today I thought we'd bring together a few different Games Workshop preview articles, all of which have talked about different bits of the backstory of Lionel Johnson in current 40k. Now he's got a new miniature and is active on the scene once more. So far we've mainly just had a few small snippets of info, but put together they do tell us a fair bit, particularly when combined with all the things that we've had up to now. Perhaps the single biggest questions of exactly where he's been all this time and how he wakes are still not entirely unconfirmed. The last previous lore had him basically being sleeping on the rock, being looked after by the Watchers in the dark, though whether or not since then he's been up to all sorts of other stuff we don't really know yet. Perhaps the biggest bits of info regarding his lore actually come from the Warhammer community articles over the last day or so. There's perhaps a surprising amount of stuff alongside his rules preview, plus a preview article for a book called The Lion Son of the Forest, which also has a few more details from a Black Library preview as well. Add that together with some of the hints and teasers that we've got from the Arcs books so far, Games Workshop's initial model preview, and details from his rules, a little bit of supporting Fallen stuff from the recent Cypher book, which will be mentioned in the video, and all of the backstory that we know already, and we've got a fairly good picture, maybe just missing the middle segment, of exactly how he's going to come back. As mentioned, there's some really interesting stuff, some sort of weird foresty warp travel, a bit of detail as to his new war gear, and at least some hints that he's been active in 40k for a fair while, just on the down low. Just for a very quick and broad brush summary of more established stuff, the general setup for the Lion's disappearance and the backstory of the Dark Angels was set up in the Heresy era. The Dark Angels and Lionel Johnson return home only to find that the Dark Angels left on Caliban have turned traitor under Luther and are now in service of the ruinous powers. Lionel Johnson fights his former mentor as the Dark Angels bombard the planet of Caliban around them, destroying everything bar the bit of the planet that was shielded by the shields of their fortress monastery, where L. Johnson and Luther are having their duel. Both effectively win the confrontation one after the other, but then hesitates to strike down the other, and as they duel they're both dragged into the warp briefly. A massive number of fallen Dark Angels survive the conflicts and are plucked from the planet by the Chaos Gods, falling into the warp, being scattered through space and time, and an utter nightmare to track down. The Dark Angels convert their fortress monastery on the last shard of Caliban into the rock, fitting great engines and turning it into a spacecraft, and Luther is apprehended, driven mad by the warp and the fight, and dragged to the rock for interrogation and repentance, a secret known only to Chapter Master Azrael in the current setting. He says he'll only ever repent to the Lion. L. Johnson himself is also rescued from the warp, but not by the Dark Angels, by the secretive little constructs that are the Watchers in the Dark, these strange hooded figures that follow the Dark Angels about, and there they keep him somewhere on the rock, the Dark Angel's codex confirming that his wounds are healed and he's more or less in stasis or asleep, and that someday he will return to lead the chapter when they most need it, and lead them to victory. In the meantime, the story of the Dark Angels is largely hunting the Fallen. They turn up at random out of the warp, both in small or great numbers. The Raven Wing locate them and the Death Wing destroy them, and it seems that some of them are aligned with Chaos but not all of them. Plenty wish for repentance or the return of Lion L. Johnson. The Dark Angels try to hunt them down and exterminate them, or drag them back for interrogation, and they conceal the dark secret that half of their legion fell to Chaos, as it probably wouldn't sit well with the rest of the Imperium. In more recent times, Demon Prince Marbas, one of the greatest of the Fallen, leads a great incursion onto the rock and frees Luther, Azrael being the only one to know, as he was the only one who knew that Luther was there in the first place. The Fallen are said to be massing in great numbers in a big army under Luther. Then, perhaps with a pretty enormous amount of backstory, we also have Cypher. He's active as one of the most notable Fallen, an agent of completely unclear intent, working both with and against the Imperium in the past at different times, seeming to be more on the side of Chaos, but often doing great things that set them back. Slung across his back, he carries a great sword that he never draws even in the most dire of circumstances, this one strongly suspected to be the Lion Sword of the Primarch himself, though it's possible it could be other things like Luther's sword or something else entirely. At a couple of times he seems to have wanted to return it to the Emperor, or it's been hinted that it might be a key that unlocks something, but mainly cryptic hints without real any confirmation. It's also been implied that he might be in some way working as the Emperor's agent, all a bit unclear, and it might well be something that we never get answers to. Though I've seen a few people speculate it could be Corswain or Zahariel from the Heresy. In a recent book, he makes an attempt to reach the Golden Throne, possibly to destroy it, though possibly not. It's heavily implied that he stopped via a vision that was given to a nearby custodian by the Emperor himself, and the fact that he relents when he's asked not to probably means that he's not entirely against the Emperor. In any case, people strongly suspect that he's going to be instrumental in the Lion's return somehow. It'd almost be a bit of a disappointment if he wasn't, to be honest, as it seems like that's partly what his story's been building up to. I'm probably missing a few major things, but that more or less brings us up to current 40k, the Arcs of Omen series setting the stage for his comeback. From the events of the third book, it sounds like the Dark Angels are going to be lured into a big conflict with chaos from Vashtor and Abaddon's machinations, and it sounds like the events of this are going to lead to either the Lion choosing to return to help them out, or maybe putting in the motions to wake him up, though there is some pretty good evidence that he's already been active already. Other hints of Dark Angel's mysteriousness are that one part of the key was on a Dark Angel's crashed vessel from the Heresy. That was on Arthas Moloch, so kind of interesting to think what sort of relics could be there. Also, throughout the series, we've had this prophecy that's happened as well. That seemed to quite strongly imply the Lion returns, but it's kind of hard to interpret literally. And then Games Workshop's teaser tarot cards, the last book of which is going to be the Lost Child, the Star, the Knight, and the Galaxy inversed. The Knight certainly appears to be the Lion from his garb. Never mind that that's his whole aesthetic anyway. Then, and perhaps some of the most interesting things lately, Games Workshop has confirmed things in a few of their preview articles. First up, they absolutely say that he has not just been sleeping since the Heresy, and he has been acting covertly. That implies he's already out in the wild, battling the forces of chaos, no doubt, and it could mean for the Arcs of Omen series, all that would need to happen is for a reason for him to return, either for him to choose to, or make him able to, if there was something else preventing him. I guess it implies that the Arcs book might need to start at some time in the past, to show how he's actually woken up and stuff. I think it might be a little bit of an anticlimax if he just walked on in and said, "Yes, I've been around for a while." In one of the early Arcs of Omen books as well, Dante appeared to find some evidence that the Lion had been up and about. They came across a purged Ark of Omen that once had a whole load of chaos on it, but they were all gone, and then there were just some plants and vegetation growing in its place, all very mysterious. A fair few people suspected that that would be a sign of the Lion at the time. It now seems that that's more or less confirmed, as apparently he gets followed around by some unearthly vegetation. From another quote from one of Games Workshop's previews, they've also said that he's awoken into the nightmare known as the Imperium Nihilus after 10,000 years. To me, taken with the first statement, that would imply that he's woken up after the formation of the Great Rift, otherwise it wouldn't be the Imperium Nihilus, so I guess Millennium 40k or after. But also perhaps a fair bit before the actual Arcs of Omen series kicked off, if he does seem to be in a fit state to take down an Arc of Omen as soon as they turn up. My guess would be that Cypher will be somehow implicated in actually waking him up in the first place, though I guess we'll see. Talking of those supernatural abilities, it sounds like Games Workshop is going to be trying to paint him as a bit of a wandering knight type character, a mysterious figure who comes out of the forest apparently, to help with all your local monster slaying needs, whether it might happen to be chaos or some sort of foul Xenos abomination. I was kind of surprised at just how much lore they gave us from the Lion Rules article that they came out with. I guess this will be talking about the time when he's been active but before his presence has been known. The quotes are that legends spread on disconnected worlds see a figure stalking in mist-wreathed passages, slaying monsters with ease. To various peoples, he's known as the Cowed Giant, the Unforgiving Knight, or even the Emperor Incarnate, but in reality, he's Lion L. Johnson of the Dark Angels. Perhaps one of the most unexpected things is that his arrival is heralded by an apparition of ancient forests fading from the ether, and that the true nature of this empiric travel is known only to him. From these teasers, it sounds like he's able to go from world to world, travelling down these mysterious forested paths. It seems like he's being billed as a supernatural travelling knight, forever on the move throughout the warp, maybe in a similar sort of way to Caldor Drago of the Grey Knights. I feel like the story and the imagery that they're trying to build up is kind of interesting, but I must admit, I think it's a bit odd when applied on a practical level. Does he just somehow conjure up some forest magic to warp jump through the warp from place to place? Or is it some way used by some sort of ancient and powerful warp travel technology that's far above just about anything that the Imperium has to offer? I kind of feel like his aesthetic for the most part isn't really particularly supernatural, perhaps a bit less so than certain other Primarchs, like the Fallen Sanguinius for example. Though I guess other Primarchs do have some weird things going on. Corvus Corax of the Raven Guard is known to have some sort of shadowy magic type thing happening, even though I don't think he's known to be a psyker. Otherwise though, regardless of whatever way he gets from place to place, we do know a little bit about his current weapons and abilities. His miniature gives us a few small clues. He does look a fair bit older, maybe the long sleeve has had some unfortunate side effects. He doesn't seem to be quite as well preserved as Rabute Gilliman, who was in stasis. He seems to be travelling with a couple of attendant watchers in the dark. Maybe these are the ones that were looking over him while he slept. They seem to be following him around as relic bearers, one with a scepter and one with a scabbard for his sword. He does appear to have got with the current Dark Angel's trends and updated his armour to be a deep green. Not sure if that's going to be any major lore thing, or it's just a bit more artistic license from the person who painted the miniature there. You certainly could paint him black in the Heresy style armour if you wanted to. I have seen a few people commenting that that might almost make a bit more sense if he's newly awoken. Otherwise, we know a few bits of details about his weapons. His blade is called Fealty, which I don't think we know too much about the origins of yet, but it is basically confirmed not to be the Lion Sword, so if Cypher does indeed have that, it seems like he's chosen not to return his old blade yet. I'd also guess that now we have the models for him, he's almost certainly not going to. I can't exactly see Games Workshop coming out with another model for Lionel Johnson with a slightly updated blade, so it seems unlikely he's going to get his old sword back even if he asks nicely. Kind of feels just a little bit disappointing to me. I thought that that was what his story was probably building up to when I originally read about him in the Dark Angels lore ages back. In his other arm, he carries the Emperor's shield, though. It's very unclear how he got hold of this. I don't think it was mentioned that he was using it when he was fighting Luther at some point in the Heresy. I do kind of wonder if there's going to be any good explanation for how he gets a hold of that, or if it just comes to him via warp magic or something strange like that. A bit of parity, though. Gilliman has the Emperor's sword, he's got the Emperor's shield. In a few articles, they have confirmed one of its abilities. Obviously, it's going to be very good in defense, as you'd expect. I'm sure in any sort of lore fights, it'll be a massive advantage to him. And apparently it's got the ability that when it's struck, it gets to blast back at the enemy with a sonorous boom. That does appear to be referenced in the rules, where he's got the chance to reflect some mortal wounds back at the foe. I must admit the in-game rules were just a little bit disappointing for it though. I kind of expected the Emperor's Shield to at least give you something like a 3+ invul save if Gilliman gets one from his armour. Finally, we've got a few details revolving around the publications that are going to be coming out for the Lion. Arcs of Omen Book 5, where I'm going to guess he's going to feature pretty prominently given that he's on the cover. Then apparently there's also an upcoming novel called The Lion, Son of the Forest. The details we've got about both of these are a little bit scanty at the moment. I guess we'll get a bit more of a preview once they're released. I'll certainly hope to cover the Arcs of Omen one here on the channel. My guess is that it will be the Arcs one where we get the actual story of how he wakes up and returns to his Legion, probably the most important bits, and it looks like he's going to be helping out the Dark Angels and Dante, setting up a great big fight against Chaos in the Somnium Stars, going to be fighting against Abaddon, Angron, Vashtor, and a whole bunch of demons along the way. Perhaps the only major detail that Games Workshop have confirmed is that the Lion's going to be going 1v1 versus Angron at some stage. I asked your guys your opinions on that in a recent video, and it looks like most people's money is on the Lion triumphing from this one, perhaps not least because Angron can die and then come back and respawn. So having him banished by a resurgent Primarch wouldn't actually be the biggest lore shake-up in the world. I've got no doubt that he's going to put up a fight as he does so though. The other book really does have a few interesting teasers as well from it. It's apparently a pretty massive 300+ page novel by Mike Brooks, previewed by Games Workshop. Really quite a lot of content aimed at the contemporary story of the Lion, I guess. We basically get a small blurb summary of this. Apparently he's going to be fighting against a formidable warband led by one of his traitorous sons. Might be an established character, might be someone completely new. If it's someone new, then I don't really fancy the odds of them making it through this book alive. According to the blurb, he is supposedly going to try and call on every ally he can to fight this new threat, primarily trying to gather a company of fallen knights to resist them, these presumably being the section of the fallen that are still hunted by the Dark Angels but have not fallen to chaos, and are looking for Lionel Johnson to return to lead them to victory. That could set up for a really interesting dynamic. Maybe the very Puritan Dark Angels will be forced to accept a few fallen into their number if they come back with the Primarch's blessing. From that context, it sounds like he's very much not back with his chapter at this point, so maybe it might be set before he gets united with the Dark Angels. It could actually be set in the lore before Arcs of Omen Book 5 rather than after. It wouldn't be too uncommon for Games Workshop to release things out of sequence like this. They have done so before. Finally, we get a little quote from the Lion himself saying, "I failed my father, I fear I failed my brothers, I do not wish to fail my sons." All very inspiring and resolute there, and perhaps displaying a bit more humility than you might expect from Mr. L. Johnson. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed a short summary of the Lion's lore as we know it in 40k right now. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and let me know any major details I might have missed. There's been a fair amount of preview stuff revealed, never mind a frankly enormous amount of stuff from the entire history of the Dark Angels. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly be interested to try and do a quick summary of the lore of Arcs of Omen 5 when we get it. I do tend to post new 40k things just about every day, so feel free to check back later if you'd like to see more. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page. If you have been enjoying all these videos quite a bit, then any support is enormously appreciated. It is links down in the video description below if you'd like to check it out. As well as supporting new video content coming, channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description below. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.